London in the 1800s was the beating heart of an empire, home to over 1 million souls by 1801 and swelling to nearly 7 million by century's end. It was the largest city on earth, a sprawling labyrinth of wealth and squalor, innovation and suffering. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, engravings, and prints to life, allowing us to shift perspective, change camera angles, and move through the same scenes in ways their original artists never could. We'll walk cobbled streets thick with coal smoke, stand beneath bridges groaning under the weight of humanity, and glimpse moments frozen in time but now animated through technology. First, I want to talk about the Thames itself, the dark, churning river that made London possible. By the early 1800s, the Thames was London's lifeline and its sewer. This view shows a wide stretch of water crowded with wherries, coal barges, and tall-masted merchant ships jostling for space. In the foreground, watermen row passengers across choppy water stained brown with waste. The midground is a forest of rigging and sails, masts leaning at angles, hulls scraping against wooden docks. Beyond, the skyline bristles with church spires, warehouses, and the dome of St. Paul's rising through layers of haze. The air smells of tar, fish, and human filth. Shouts echo from the wharves, dockers unloading tea from India, timber from the Baltic, sugar from the West Indies. But the Thames was also deadly. Cholera thrived in its waters. In 1832 and again in 1848, outbreaks killed thousands. Collisions between boats were common, and bodies floated downstream with grim regularity. Still, the river was everything: commerce, transport, employment. Without it, London would starve. By the 1860s, the Great Stink forced Parliament to act, and Joseph Bazalgette's revolutionary sewer system finally began to cleanse the water. Today, the Thames is unrecognizable, clean enough for fish, crossed by elegant bridges, its banks lined with cafes and galleries where Londoners stroll without fear of disease. This view shows the old medieval London Bridge in its final years, still crowded with wooden houses clinging to its sides like barnacles. By 1831, it had stood for 6 centuries, its 19 narrow arches forcing the river into rapids beneath. In the foreground, pedestrians squeeze between carts and street vendors hawking ribbons and hot pies. The midground reveals the bridge itself, narrow, congested, sagging under centuries of repairs. Beyond it, the Thames churns violently through the arches, creating dangerous currents that claimed lives every year. The noise is relentless: hooves on stone, wagon wheels creaking, traders shouting, water roaring below. The bridge reeked of rot and damp wood. Fires were constant threats. In 1758, flames had destroyed much of the northern end. Traffic jams lasted hours. The bridge was also a symbol. Crossing it meant entering the city of London proper, the ancient square mile of financial power. But by the 1820s, it was clear the old bridge had to go. In 1831, a new London bridge opened just upstream, wider and modern, designed by John Rennie. The old bridge was demolished shortly after. Remarkably, pieces of it were salvaged and still exist in museum collections, fragments of a structure that once defined the city's heartbeat. By the 1820s, Covent Garden was London's great fruit and vegetable market, a riot of color and noise before the sun fully rose. This view shows the piazza packed with carts overflowing with cabbages, turnips, strawberries, and flowers. In the foreground, a costermonger, a street seller, haggles with a cook from a wealthy household, coins changing hands over baskets of apples. The midground is chaos: porters staggering under sacks, horses stamping, women in shawls sorting produce by lantern light. Behind them, the elegant colonnades of Inigo Jones's 17th-century buildings frame the scene, their classical symmetry at odds with the earthy tumult below. The air smells of crushed fruit, manure, and damp earth. Shouts overlap, prices called, insults traded, laughter sharp and quick. But Covent Garden was also dangerous. Pickpockets worked the crowds. Fights broke out over stolen goods or unpaid debts. Women working alone faced harassment and worse. The market was the city's belly, feeding hundreds of thousands, but it was also a place where desperation and commerce collided. By the 1860s, the market was overwhelming the neighborhood, and in 1974, it relocated south to Nine Elms. Today, Covent Garden is a polished tourist destination: boutique shops, street performers, craft stalls, but the piazza's bones remain, and if you stand there early in the morning, you can almost hear the echoes of that old dawn chorus. This view shows the London docks at Wapping, a vast fortress of commerce carved from the marshy banks of the Thames. By the 1850s, these docks were among the busiest in the world, handling ships from every corner of the British Empire. In the foreground, stevedores, dockworkers heave crates of tobacco, barrels of rum, and bales of cotton onto wooden quays. The midground reveals rows of brick warehouses, their facades pierced by iron cranes, goods stacked 6 stories high. Beyond, the river teems with ships, tall East Indiamen, sleek clippers, smoke-belching steamers. The air is thick with the smells of spices, tar, tobacco, and sweat. Shouts in a dozen languages mix with the creak of rigging and the splash of cargo nets. But the docks were brutal. Work was uncertain. Men gathered at dawn, hoping to be chosen for a day's pay. Accidents were common: crushed limbs, falls from heights, drownings. Theft was rampant. Entire cargoes vanished into the rookeries nearby. And disease, cholera, typhus, smallpox stalked the cramped tenements where dockworkers lived. Yet the docks were also symbols of empire and ambition, the engine that powered Britain's global dominance. By the mid-20th century, containerization and bombings during World War II left the old docks obsolete. Today, Wapping is transformed. Luxury flats occupy converted warehouses, and the water is calm and clean. But the ghosts of that roaring industry still linger in the narrow streets and old pub names. By 1840, Trafalgar Square was rising from a tangle of slums and stables. This view shows the square half-finished, scaffolding around the base of Nelson's Column, which wouldn't be completed until 1843. In the foreground, laborers chip at granite blocks, dust hanging in the air. The midground reveals the emerging plaza, paved, geometric, ambitious, framed by the National Gallery to the north, completed just 6 years earlier in 1838. Behind, the skyline is a mix of church spires and the low rooftops of Westminster. The air smells of stone dust, horse dung, and coal smoke. Shouts from foremen blend with the clang of chisels and the rumble of carts hauling materials. But this was contested ground. The site had been a crowded, unsanitary neighborhood known as the King's Mews, demolished to make way for this grand imperial statement. The poor were displaced with no compensation, pushed into already overcrowded slums nearby. And the square itself was built to celebrate naval victory at Trafalgar in 1805, a monument to empire even as hunger and poverty gripped the streets beyond it. Chartist protests for voting rights would gather here in the 1840s, police clashing with crowds demanding reform. By the late 1800s, the square was complete, 4 lion statues added in 1867, fountains installed. Today, Trafalgar Square is London's most famous public space, a site of protest, celebration, and tourism, still watched over by Nelson standing high above the city he helped dominate. The 1800s in London feel impossibly distant and yet strangely close. With AI, we can stand in those same streets, see the light fall on the same river, and glimpse faces that once lived and struggled and hoped in ways not so different from our own. The city built then, its railways, bridges, sewers, and streets still shapes the London you can walk today. If there's another city, another moment, or another scene from history you'd like me to reconstruct and explore, let me know in the comments. Again, thank you so much.